Hello and welcome to Apple This Week with me, Alex Webb, and my colleague Mark Gurman. We're coming to you live on Facebook Live, YouTube, and Bloomberg.com from Bloomberg's office on the Embarcadero here in San Francisco. Slightly new view this week. Pleasant shot of some of the other peers here in the area. We're going to be talking a little bit later about the MacBook Pro launch last week. We were both there at the event. Some of the things we learned, some of the things we didn't learn. And we'd love to hear any questions that you have. We'll do our best to answer them. But before we set about talking about MacBooks, there are some other issues we want to tackle. AirPods has been an issue in the past week. There was a little bit of news the day before the MacBook event, and so what's kind of panned out there?
Right, so when Apple announced the iPhone 7, one of the biggest controversies, not really a feature, was that the iPhone 7 doesn't have a standard 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. And come take a look at this. So you look at the bottom of the iPhone 7 and you just have the lightning connector instead of the standard headphone jack. And in order to ease that transition, Apple announced a pair of headphones called the AirPods. Now the AirPods were these $159 wireless earphones.
It's pretty steep.
It is steep. It looks just like EarPods, the classic wired ones that come for free with the iPhone, but no wires, completely wireless. These were supposed to come out the last week of October, late October. And so the day before the Apple event, the Mac event, Apple put out a statement to indicate that they need a little bit more time, quote unquote, to get the headphones right. They haven't indicated when they're going to come out. They haven't indicated what the problem was, but a lot of the reviewers who are using pre-production models of the AirPods were reporting problems with music playback, the software, the Siri input, and the AirPods just losing overall connection. So we'll see what the actual rationale behind the delay was, and we're still trying to find out when they're actually going to hit the market.
Because the Nike, or the Apple Nike Plus watch became available to purchase the day after the Mac event. So it might have seemed like that would have been the opportune timing to bring the AirPods out as well.
Right, because you can connect Bluetooth, over Bluetooth, the headphones to the Apple Watch, and given it has GPS, there's no reason for you to bring your phone with you on a run. I actually got one of those Nike watches myself the other day, and you can leave the phone behind, but you need wireless Bluetooth headphones to go with it. Apple does have some alternatives through its Beats acquisition. They have a few Beats headphones with the same wireless pairing chip. So we'll see what people end up thinking about those as they use them over the next few weeks.
Television was another issue. There's a new app.
That's right. So in addition to the MacBook Pro, which we'll touch upon in a few minutes, Apple announced a new app just called TV. And basically, it's an application that's sort of like a watch list. It recommends different content for you that's from the different apps that are on the Apple TV, the different content apps that are on iOS, the iPad, and the iPhone, and the iPod Touch. Interestingly, it seems like this is a little too late. I feel like this should have been the interface of this new Apple TV rather than an app on top of it. You know what I mean?
Although I think the issue is here, of course, you have to have buy-in from those apps. And
Right.
It's not necessarily easy to negotiate with those guys, as has been demonstrated by the fact that this app doesn't include Netflix. So basically the idea is that you can type into the top Game of Thrones, and it will look across all of your content apps, whether that be HBO Now, Stars, any number of others. And of course, as we know, Game of Thrones is on HBO. So from within the Apple app TV, it will pull up Game of Thrones and you can watch it from inside that app. And interestingly,
and that's the current implementation, though. And this app goes a step further to recommend it based on the past one.
Exactly.
That's
And also, it replaces, apparently, I saw someone tweet about this, Neil Seibert, he said that it's going to replace the classic video app. So that's going to be the main platform
on the iPhone
as well.
That will be interesting, and actually they came out with an iOS 10.2 beta, which has a few new features for the Videos app. And digging into the code, a few developers on Twitter were talking about how this app is going to be replaced in 10.2 as well, like you said, Neil said, and Apple can actually hit that switch over the air in the background. So that's probably how employees are testing it, like they just hit a switch and the video app will change to the TV app. And that makes sense, but I think on the iPhone it would need a tab to store sort of the videos you have in the cloud.
Let's move on to the main topic now. Or actually, no, I suppose we have one question.
Oh, cool.
So someone's asking, Apple is aiming at a certain market, Microsoft is aiming at everyone. There was, of course, also a Microsoft event last week. Maybe let's touch on that in a second. I mean, what do you make of that particular statement, Apple is aiming at a certain market? From my side, it seems that products are maybe targeted as
towards different markets.
Different demographics.
But I think Apple's going for the mainstream. They have the MacBook Air, which is under $900, or it was under $900, now it's under $1,000 for the 13-inch. They have the MacBook Pro, which is sort of geared toward mainstream professionals, not the really high-end professionals that Apple used to really cater to, but sort of like your everyday graphic designer, video editor. Then you have everyone who wants an iPhone, right? Microsoft going towards everyone, of course they're going towards everyone because of their business model. The business model is to sell the software to all the devices. So you can basically get Microsoft anywhere, whether it's an Android phone, an iPhone, a Windows phone. So from that perspective, yes, Microsoft is going after everyone, whereas Apple is going after...
The everyone in that sense are the businesses who would put it into their products and then sell those products. Apple is aiming directly at the consumer.
Right.
And I mean, there has been a certain amount of shift recently. They announced a huge, 4, I think, tie-ups with IBM, Cisco, Deloitte, and SAP to try and sell things through their channels and encourage enterprises to use Apple products.
Internationally as well.
Exactly, but it's a slightly different play from the way Microsoft is doing it. So I'm not sure it's fair to say. We have one other question. Why did Apple get rid of USB ports? They say one thing, there are other possibilities, but what's your take?
Right, so let's jump into the MacBook Pro part of the segment too, but to start off with that, USB ports. So the new 13-inch and 15-inch MacBook Pro has a completely new connector setup. So there's 4 connectors on the MacBook Pro now, and they're all the same. They're all USB-C shaped connectors that use the Thunderbolt 3 technology. And basically, this is the next step over the USB-C connectors on the 12-inch MacBook from last year. Basically, all these connectors do the same thing. They can all drive data to displays. Apple announced those LG 4K and 5K displays. They can do transfers to sort of like hard drives, SD card slots, adapters, stuff like that. And it can take power, so you can charge in any of the ports. Why did they do this? Well, they're quite a bit thinner. They're quite a bit smaller. It takes up less space. They can fit in bigger battery, other technologies inside. And they're completely universal so that you can stick whatever adapters you want into all of them, and it makes the user experience a little bit better. The issue is right now, those adapters are not mainstream. People still use USB. The iPhone 7 even, the phone they just came out with in September, it comes with a standard USB 2.0 connector. So in order to charge your phone in the MacBook Pro, you'll need to get an adapter. Of course, it's been this way with the 12-inch MacBook since last year, but this is more of their mainstream device.
I would love to see Apple break down how much money they're going to make on dongles in the next quarter, because there are a lot from all the different devices. But maybe let's back out a little bit and just run through exactly what was announced last week. So we had MacBook Pros, basically.
Right, so MacBook Pro is the highlight of the announcement. 3 new models, a 13-inch model with the OLED Touch Bar that we broke the news about, the 15-inch model with the Touch Bar as well, and then there's also a 13-inch model without the Touch Bar.
So let's explain what this Touch Bar is, essentially. So in the classic Macs, well, any computer, you have your F1 to F12 buttons across the top. These have been completely stripped out, and there is a touch screen, which is, an inch wide, I think,
Probably
something like
even
that.
less, maybe.
And
it goes across the top.
And it goes across the top. So it replaces all of those buttons from before, but when you're in a different app, so if you're in iTunes, for example, it will have play, pause, and tracking of the song. If you're in Photoshop, there's stuff you can do with the shading and all that sort of stuff. It adapts to the specific application which you're using.
Right, and I think one of the cooler implementations is in Final Cut Pro or in iMovie, you can split clips, add new clips into it, so it actually makes some processes in certain Pro applications a little bit quicker and easier. In iTunes, for just music controls, that's pretty basic, but if you're jumping into sort of the professional application market, as Photoshop showed, they had a DJ app on stage, then the applications become a little bit cooler and more useful. But is that really something that should represent a 4-year upgrade cycle for the MacBook Pro? That touch bar. The last time the MacBook Pro was revamped was in 2012 with the Retina display. It was thinner, it was complete overhaul end to end. This just seems like they added a new color, they made it a little bit smaller, better screen slightly in terms of colors, but that touch bar is really what Apple's banking on to sell these new machines. What do you think about that?
It seems to me, that it's my take for what it's worth is that it's about cost. A lot of these other laptop makers are now placing full touch screens in the screen itself, and that is not what Apple's doing. Now, of course, the touch screen is expensive. Apple has big hefty old margins on those MacBooks, and it's putting a full touchscreen in, I imagine, would be rather costly. And they examine the use case and they say, well, a lot of the things that you want to do, they think clearly you can do just with this bar. Right. It's interesting to see the way they've split the whole product, categories up. We touched on it earlier before, but basically the iPad, they've sort of, well, not admitted, not they ever said it wasn't, but the iPad is now a content consumption device, and very few people use it for complicated, well, it seems to me, it's less useful for creating content.
Well, they're trying to fight that
Pro
notion with the iPad Pro, right?
Right, but it's very specific applications there in ways which are perhaps, I think yes, you're quite right. There are applications you can use the iPad Pro for and applications you use the MacBook Pro for.
Right.
But it's then pushing people up the price point. The people, it seemed to me, I probably would not want to buy a MacBook Pro because it's a little bit out of my price range. I don't need to spend that much money on a device. If you're a professional user, you probably do need to spend that much money.
Well, the thing is they really hiked the prices up. And the way they balanced it out was coming out with this new 13-inch MacBook Pro that after 4 years doesn't add the new touch bar. So in order to get the new MacBook Pro with the actual new functionality that they're really marketing here, you have to drop $1799 at minimum, and that's for a model with 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage, which is subpar to most professional uses. So if you're really wanting a professional MacBook Pro, you're going to want one of the higher end 13-inch models, fully loaded, or one of the 15-inch models, and your price range is going to go around $2,500 on average if you really want to beef it up to your capabilities.
We have a question here. How have investors reacted to Apple's new products, the Mac update and the iPhone 7? The Mac, let's be realistic about it, isn't a big chunk of their revenue.
It's less than 10%
less
at this
than 10%,
point.
And that's the whole Mac range, right? So the MacBook Pro within that.
But to be fair, the MacBook Pro probably makes up the majority of that 10%.
Right. Yes. In terms of profit.
If you look at the Mac as a category, the MacBook Pro is probably their most important Mac.
Right.
So they probably should have put a little bit more attention into this Mac, or even come out with this update.
Well, I think it's unfair to say they haven't put enough attention into it. It's just
been
that
4 years.
It's been 4 years. Yes, it's true. But I think to this one, there's been some attention. Maybe it could have come sooner. Yeah, as you say.
Right.
I think, but from an investor perspective, it didn't move the needle.
Yeah, no.
As far as investors are concerned, right now, Apple is the iPhone company. They have concerns that is the case. They want it to be a little bit more, I think, a lot of them. And so the question was also about the iPhone 7. Well, unfortunately, having said they're the iPhone company, the expectation is basically that next year's iPhone is the one that's really going to move the needle.
Right.
I think this one's been good enough to move it up to, keep them happy for now, but they're really looking towards next year.
It put them in a holding pattern, I would say.
Exactly.
It wasn't enough to make investors go, oh, Apple is due, but it wasn't enough for investors to react, wow, the iPhone is, light years ahead of everyone else, like it once was in the beginning of the decade.
It'd be interesting to see what other products come up between now and the iPhone 8 or iPhone 10, whatever they call it.
Right.
Question here, how much does Apple rely on celebrity endorsements? What happens if celebrities stop using Apple products? This has certainly been the case with Beats and with Apple Music, that they use a lot of celebrity endorsements for that. But I don't know, I'm fairly agnostic on this. Do you have a particular view?
I think it's important. I think a lot of their marketing comes from a component of their PR business known as buzz marketing. And working with celebrities and making sure to place that their products in movies is very important to the company. People see, an actor or an actress or a singer using an iPhone or an Apple Watch, they're going to want to buy one themselves. Apple really tried hyping up the Apple Watch early by making special edition all gold models, including the band, and giving them to Beyonce and Drake and Pharrell and Carl. So that's important.
Having said that, though, to play the devil's advocate slightly, you see Samsung phones and Sony laptops, and even in Spider-Man, when he went on to search, he used Microsoft Bing, and I don't think that actually in those kind of product placements necessarily have made a huge difference.
Right. Think about it this way. With Sony makes products, technology, consumer electronics, and they make movies. So that's why you see in the last few Daniel Craig James Bond movies, he's all Sony'd out in terms of phones and laptops and stuff like that. Apple doesn't own a studio, but they do have their partners. You look at Disney, they have, either real iMacs and MacBooks in some of their movies, and if it's a graphical, cartoonish movie, it's hard not to find a cartoon iMac in some of their animated films.
There's a question here about reliability. Some people are saying that Microsoft is still not as reliable of a company as Apple. I'm not entirely sure what that means, actually. Is it reliable as a stock or reliable as in terms of the product? I mean, I think any company right now does have, some issues with some of their devices, but it seems to me that a lot of these problems are because they think they can push updates via software, which can remedy any issues. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I'm not sure you want to go near that.
I mean, Apple sort of, I think, needs to take a little bit of a step back and focus on the underlying components under iOS and Mac OS. And they certainly have been doing so. The last 2 Mac OS updates have been far more stable than the 2 or 3 before it. iOS 9, which came out with the iPhone 6S last year, a significant component of it was the underlying architecture to make it less buggy. So clearly Apple agrees that there needs to be more improvement, continuous, and it seems like that's something they're focusing on more and more. So
when you say more improvement, you mean in what sense?
Battery life, speed, app launch times, bugginess, the phone not restarting. I mean, I remember when some of the earlier iPhone models came out, you would download an app and the app would just crash at launch, and it was a poor experience, it was slow and buggy, but clearly the iPhone hardware has always been more powerful than that. So it's really about making sure the software and the hardware are tightly integrated enough to resolve bugs very quickly. And you can see, since Apple came out with the over-the-air software updates with the carriers and iOS 5 about 5 years ago, each year they've been increasing the speed of how often they do over-the-air bug fixes, and they're fairly quick. I think there's been 2 or 3 already since the iPhone 7 came out. Nobody talks about them because they're so quick and easy. They happen overnight. So you can wake up one day with your iPhone being less buggy.
It's I think the problem that particularly Apple has to deal with is the fact that because they will ship on launch weekend, whatever it is, 40 million iPhones or something, they've got a fix and fast date by which they've got to hit to be able to go into production on the hardware.
Right.
That is not necessarily the case for a lot of their competitors, because they
Right.
might have to start producing these things several months in advance. It's something which has a lower production ramp, they can deal with stuff a lot closer to the wire.
Right. I agree. In terms of, loading the OS onto the phones as they're about to ship, since Apple, like you said, is shipping so many phones, probably between 10 and 15 million per opening weekend at their current rate, it's a complicated process getting that many OSs loaded onto that many phones in such a short period of time right out the door.
Got a question here. Someone's saying that the Lenovo added this touch bar over a year ago, and also I don't know a huge amount about that product. Is that something that's been on your radar at all?
Yeah, I've seen that. There's been other PC makers that have done a touch bar. The difference here is the integrated approach for Apple, whereas they're using a lot of the graphical user interface elements and underlying software from the Apple Watch and the iPhone, so their Mac users are sort of familiar, and then integrate it with developers and apps. Whereas on the other PCs, like from Lenovo, it was more system-based rather than tied to augmenting the applications.
Right. Just to see if there's another question here that we want to take before we wrap up. Someone's suggesting, this is a very loaded question, so I'm not sure we should quite tackle it in these terms. Do you agree that Apple is alienating loyal customers? Are Apple alienating customers, or is Apple alienating customers who have the iPhone 5 and 6? To me, this argument is like...
I don't get it. Like alienating the iPhone 5 and iPhone 6 users?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. I think it's probably to do with, as you push software upgrades.
I see.
But this isn't a new tactic. This is basically what Microsoft did all the way through the 90s,
Right.
Pushing new iterations of Windows, which forced people, of course, to then upgrade their computers. And, of course, as games got more hardware intensive, they also needed to upgrade their computers. So, I don't think Apple's being particularly novel in this kind of thing.
Right. I could see why people with the iPhone 5 might not be happy, given that they're not going to get software updates anymore. But if you look at it in comparison to the industry, you get an Android phone, there's no guarantee that you're ever going to get a software update. If you get an iPhone 7, I could tell you right now that you're going to get next year's software update, the one the year after next, and maybe even the one year after that. Right? And it's always going to be a 2-3 year life cycle for the software updates. It's just about making sure they don't release new features to a phone whose hardware can't make it run effectively.
I think Tim Cook was kind of quite braggadly about this at the event. He was highlighting the pace at which iPhone users upgrade the operating system, and then compared that to Android users.
Right.
And it's a far bigger difference. But I think it's probably easier to update your iPhone than it is to update Android.
Right, and part of that, it's not the user's fault. It's just that the carriers are so tied to the software updates on Android, and the hardware makers are all over the place, hundreds of OEMs, that it's just the users aren't being offered it.
Right.
That's the problem at heart here.
Well, I think that's enough for today.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for tuning in. Hope to see you next week as well. Please, send any feedback you have to us on Twitter and Facebook, and please follow us on Twitter @Technology. That's the Bloomberg Technology team handle. Have a lovely afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world.
Thank you.